Wow, I forgot hosted by the marketing perspective. All right, let me go again. 3, 2, 1, and
Wow, wow, I got that wow, wow. Anything that I want, I'ma get it now. Yeah, wow.
what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Click-Worthy Combos brought to you by the marketing perspective. My name is MD Klein, and I am here with the other half of the marketing perspective, my lovely and talented partner, Miss Maureen Mo Money Connors.
Hello.
So today we are talking about one of my favorite topics coming from agency background, the evolution of the agency model. You also came from an agency background as well. Am I correct?
I did about 3 years at Ogilvy One, which is the consulting arm of Ogilvy and Mather.
Love it. So it hasn't really been talked about how the agency model has evolved, not only internally with the structure of agencies themselves, but also like the client engagement model. So I think, historically going back to the agency of record days, I feel like everybody had an agency of record. It was a rather large agency, Ogilvy probably being one of those agencies. I know like the Drogas of the world, BBDO, like all of these agencies are very competitive. Huge, massive. A lot of them were global.
Massive.
They had hubs, New York, LA, a lot in London. They really focused on the advertising space. They were your one-stop shop.
100%. It was a bit of, I like to think of it as like Mad Men, right? Like you had
Yes.
your account person, you had your copy person, you had your creative staff, right? And they were almost like a full service team that was dedicated to your business. And you really paid them, X amount per year based on how much you think you'd use. I always go back to Mad Men. I love that show.
I love that show too. And you made me think, like, especially in the days of less remote work or like pre-COVID days, when agencies would show up to your office, they would show up like a full squad. Signing in people to the office, it was a lot of work, but I remember having agencies to do specific things. So like you would have your ad agency to do all of your TVCs or commercials, and then you'd have your experiential, and then you'd have your direct mail, and you had to have a big roster of agencies in order to kind of work all within the same internal team to deliver on those things.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times your agency of record almost became the keeper of your brand. So instead of your internal team being the keeper of your brand and your tone of voice and things like that, it was really owned by this agency who really made a lot of the decisions on what was next with the brand, how could the brand evolve, and pitch it back to the team that was day in, day out in the business.
That working model almost made it become forced to engage with these agencies. Like you didn't think about bringing on a new agency very often, or bringing on freelance talent or other types of engagements, because you had to use those hours. You had to be cost optimized, and you had to work with what you had because it was already set out in advance. Like there wasn't much flexibility to pivot the strategy or who you worked with or how you worked with them. That definitely was kind of almost pre-COVID state. And now it's shift to a much more flexible working model, both within agencies themselves and, like I had mentioned, in the client working relationship.
I think one of the reasons is there was almost a little bit of fear of leaving agencies. One, I think finding a new agency of record was a ton of work. I remember going through the process when I was at Barclays, and, it was visiting 5 or 6 agencies, going through their spiel, kind of doing this whole RFP process. If you wanted your creative to be tied with your media agency, like how does that work? And then there was onboarding an agency, the intricacies of your business, especially when you think about highly regulated industries like banking, insurance, healthcare, getting those agencies in and having them understand like the do's and the don'ts. It would save a lot of time to stick with the same agency. And I think that the idea of how heavy a lift it was to onboard a new agency kept people with agencies for longer, even if they didn't feel like the work was quite as, breakthrough, and they'd sort of entered into this sea of sameness in their industry.
You bring up a perfect point. Like I think of settling. I think there was just a lot of settling because it was easy. You had to use them. You almost got into this cycle of rinse and repeat. I think the same was also kind of the process in terms of workflow, just that the timelines and the process to have to go through these huge agencies to get approval, from doing the creative ideation, then getting it to your account person and the producer and your creative directors. It was just such a long process that clients weren't able to get anything done quickly. So it was really hard to respond, and likely a lot of opportunities missed if there are those moments in time when you really want to respond to something, whether it's an economical or social kind of engagement that you want to kind of jump on. You couldn't really do that because the timelines from end to end took so long, and then the feedback loops, it just felt like it took a really long time to get something start to finish.
I think that's a really good point. And I think what I would just ask is, because we talk about the new agency model, like, what do you think about the model has changed that allows it to be more agile and kind of get that speed to market? Like, what is the difference?
It's really team structure on both the agency side and the client side. Like, the client agency relationship is different, but also I think agencies now are expanding their talent pools and hiring specialists, working in a model where if they're needed for a project, they're brought into that client's roster. So it's not necessarily you have this default set of team members. You know, if you need a video person, they'll come in for whatever project that is. If you need an illustrator, versus this is who you're staffed with. How do they work within the parameters of the projects that you give them? What if they can't meet those expectations? Do you just settle for subpar work? Are you trying to pull people off of different accounts, then getting people up to speed on your brand? That's quite a process to go through. And then again, affects speed of market, speed to deliver to your client. And then internally, I think there's definitely less red tape and lines in the sand drawn between your marketers and your creative teams, and having more of a collaboration from the start is allowing that more fluid working model, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I'm going to go back and pull, I think, a little bit of a string of what you said, which was this idea that you're not getting a full service team. You're actually shopping for an agency, you know, that you think the style aligns with your brand. And instead of going through and saying you're going to get 2 copywriters, 1 videographer, 2 account managers, 1 planner, 2 traffickers, right? And the sum total of this is, you know, X. And then you're saying, do we really need 2 traffickers? Could we get around with 1.5 traffickers? What you have instead is almost more of this project-based model. I do feel like this is like a bit of a dirty word, but like when you hire a contractor for your kitchen, right? Like there's almost this subcontractor who comes in and does your plumbing. You've got another subcontractor who comes in and does your electricity. And I think the new agency model, and what allows these newer agencies to be so nimble, and potentially why there are more, you know, more and more agencies springing up to compete with these behemoths who've been around forever, is that there is this like fractional working, you know, so you and I could hire a copywriter from an agency just because we need copywriter support. We don't need that entire agency's roster. We can just use a copywriter, but maybe next month we need an animator. I think it allows you to think about in real time your organization's needs, and then how do you pull that together versus an annual plan where you have to be like 2 traffickers versus 1.5 versus 1, you know, and somewhere that balance could be off.
Also on the agency side, rather than having full stack talent that are jack of all trades that easily burn out because they have to manage all of these tasks, you're hiring focused, specialized resources and talent that are able to deliver a better quality, make your clients happier, delivering better quality work, but not necessarily burned out because you can pull as needed. They're only utilized for the projects where their skill set is fully tapped into, rather than having a video person trying to design a brand identity. They might be able to do it, but is that where their time is best spent? Is there opportunity missed not utilizing them for specialized skills and expanding the capabilities of whatever internal team might be lacking? So I think that also is more cost optimal for the agencies, but I think for the client side, you're getting more bang for your buck with some of these agencies that allow you to have that flexibility to kind of squad up or down as you need to.
If you've been an agency, especially some of the big ones, you know that when you lose a client, you lose sort of everyone associated with that client, copywriters, creatives, everyone. Like sometimes if there's an opening, they can move to other things. But generally, if your client goes away, you're looking for a job. So I think that this new model allows people a bit more flexibility to work on the things that they want to work on and not be so reliant on these long-term relationships.
Kind of an unlock for people hiring agencies. You can think about your organizational needs or your plans or gaps that you may have on an internal team and really seek out an agency that can fill multiple gaps and is not just going to be your agency of record that fills your advertising quota. It's going to be someone that can get to know your brand, but is able to deliver on a bunch of different asks and deliverables to meet the demand of your business. To be able to adapt, I think, is a huge unlock with this new model versus the rigid kind of process that it used to be.
Yeah, I also think one of the things that this got me thinking of when we talked about this as a topic was typically internal agencies were used, I would say, for a lot of production type work. And it was almost, you could go to your agency or, oh, we could just put this internal. There was almost this stigma for internal agencies. They weren't as good. They weren't as creative. They weren't like an agency. In my experience, I've found that internal creative agencies have been incredibly talented, but they're just undervalued because they don't come with that sex appeal of like an ad agency who's done this top of the line brand work. I think this new model actually brings the internal agencies a lot closer to the work, to the brand, and has them feeling integrated with the agencies. And I think you and I experienced that working together in this model, right? It was everything came from this internal agency and brand team. And then we liaise with our agencies to then say, how do we expand this to take it to the next level? So I think it just means you're utilizing those in-house resources you've invested in already as the talent that they are. And hopefully that'll lead to, more success in internal agencies, less turnover, things like that.
That's a great point. And I think the other piece that you just jogged was like employee retention. When people are feeling more engaged with what they're doing and they're closer to the work and they understand the business objectives that they're working towards and how these specific initiatives contribute towards that, they feel a sense of accountability and ownership and even have a better understanding. I remember taking over a creative team that had little to no understanding of the metrics and results. And that was something that we started to talk about in our conversations. And having one large team that was both agency and internal, there was this sense of collaboration and integration where you felt really embedded within the organization itself rather than a service provider that just took orders and shelled out creative as it was requested. So I think that's definitely a huge step in the right direction. That also helps, to your point, with turnover and keeps things fresh.
You mentioned a lot of these agencies changes have sort of come about in this post-COVID world. What do you think is the difference there with pre-COVID and post-COVID? Is it just remote working? Is there something else that's sort of changed?
There is a demand for more speed. People wanted things done quickly, but they would kind of tolerate and accept the speed of which things were done because that's how things always were. Versus now, post-COVID, zero-based thinking, not even thinking about what was done before. How could we do this now? What are some different ways that we could work? Remote working being a huge unlock. You can hire from anywhere in the world. You can have staff working 24 hours a day. When the East Coast or US team stops work, the European team, they're waking up and they're jumping in where this team left off. So I think it definitely enables speed. It enables talent pools that you weren't necessarily able to tap into before. Like, sure, there were different hubs, but they didn't always have the same clients. They had clients that you could go to and sit in an office and have these war rooms. And I think that that's still able to happen in this remote environment. And we've seen success with it, having a remote internal team and working with an agency that not only was remote, but also had workers and talent from a global network. So I think there's a ton of huge unlocks there. But that question brings me to this one. Do you think there's any negative effects or anything's missing that used to exist that should come back into kind of this new agency model?
There's a lot of different things. Agencies don't need to have like a physical footprint. But I think probably the piece that I would say is missing, and maybe it's not missing if you're pulling piecemeal, right? So a copywriter here, a video person here. I think you still do need somebody who can pull in the bigger, broader idea of the brand with fresh eyes. I do think it's a similar problem with agency of record. Eventually, an agency of record sort of buys into it, and I think your creativity dries up, which is why, an agency of record would only last so long until they were ready for a refresh. I think if you don't have an agency sort of pushing refresh and those type of things on you, like your internal team needs to be able to say that. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the brand, but eventually you have to take that next step. And you do want to make sure you don't lose sight of how do you do that in a smart way, considering all the aspects. If you do have this sort of fractional model, and if somebody is not really taking into account the end-to-end brand experience and how does this fit in. So I don't know if it's missing yet, but I do wonder with this new model, like how do you think about the end-to-end brand and how do you recreate the experience? If you've got a UX design team over here, you've got your advertising team over here, and then you've got sort of your direct response marketing team over here, it does all need to come together to make sure that when you're thinking about rebrands and refreshes, that it is end to end and you're not just thinking about what is my latest advertising, strategy. How does that connect end to end?
I think you almost had your answer within your question. You do need that centralized either person or team, whether it's an agency that's going to be driving it or an internal position to be connecting all of the dots and all of the channels in some capacities. So it's just kind of thinking about what is going to work best for my organization and how do I set this up in the best way? What is that central core going to be to build off of, and who is connecting all of the dots? I couldn't have said it better, but I think if one of those kinks in the chain are broken, then you are going to have a disconnected customer experience, a disconnected brand. And I think that just does more harm than good.
Yeah, I think that's one of the risks with the new agency model, because you are getting more cost effective, but you don't want your desire to be more cost effective to be more nimble, to then impact like the brand reputation and the things that you've done and how you've worked so hard to build it already. So you do want to make sure, you're really strong in a lot of those core beliefs, those core principles, your mission, your brand promise, things like that.
Also, not having your resources spread thin, both on the agency side and on the internal side, and giving them that space to focus on things that drive the most value, allow them to think about more than the work that they're just doing in the moment. They can think about where this is in the customer journey, or the different touch points, what's happening before or after this moment in time, and how it plays into the bigger picture versus being the taskmaster that's just churning things out, where you don't necessarily think about all of those other factors. So I think being able to have that time to focus really optimizes resources in a way that makes them think bigger at the same time.
Yeah, I think so. Big agencies, or what was historically considered like the best agencies, you needed to have a minimum spend. You needed to have a minimum spend to even kind of walk through the door. So if you weren't a big brand, and you were just getting started, but you wanted really solid work, I feel like some of that was unapproachable. But now with more of these agencies, I think to your point, like one, you unlock global networks, right? And then you could have a TikTok specialist out of another country who's ingrained in it coming up with your TikTok strategy. I think you can get big agency level ideas. If you're a startup and you can't afford a chief marketing officer, there's fractional CMOs. If you can't afford a direct mail specialist, you can find somebody in an agency who just can help you with your direct mail strategy. You're able to be more focused with the things that you want to achieve. I just see this idea of working as we think about like the next generation. It leads to a lot of the things that you hear, like, I want to work when I want to work. I want to be able to take vacations. I think this idea of I'm a freelancer and I'm attached to these agencies, and as work comes up, I can kind of plug in. takes me out of that. You get 2 weeks vacation per year. I can take off when I want. I can book 80 hours a week when I want. I think there's benefits for businesses, but I actually think that there's real benefits for creatives and freelancers and independent contractors to really link up with a lot of these agencies to get more business and be able to get more out of their life on their own terms.
The other piece you just made me think about too was agencies are now working together more collaboratively. In the agency of record days, you didn't cross those lines, whereas now you see more of the agency collaboration of sharing talent, collaborating on different projects. It's not like, how am I going to win this business, but how are we going to get this work done for this client in the best way? So if an agency is killer at this, let's bring them on and collaborate and work on this together because we know we can deliver an amazing experience. So you're seeing a lot more of spreading the wealth, because why? Why hoard the work? I think it's just like, this is the way it's always been done. And it goes back to that post-COVID zero-based thinking of not just defaulting to the way that things were always done, but being like, okay, how do we approach these things that are in front of us now, and not necessarily using things of the past that may or may not have worked.
I think the model itself still exists, which is, you can book a number of hours, but instead of committing to a full year, you can ratchet those hours up. You can ratchet them down. You can change the mix that those hours get you, or you can just hire agencies that are project based. And you've always been able to do that, but I think most agencies would push for more of that retainer. Hey, Michaela, I need you to come in and give me 4 out-of-home concepts that I could take and run in a certain market for whatever product. You price that out, and then that's it. I think agencies like that kind of work as well.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think there's more of a collaboration, to kind of circle back on the point with the internal team, whereas agencies can do some of it or set up the template or some of the initial bigger thinking work, but still have the internal team be part of it, where the internal team does part of a project and they do another aspect of it with their capabilities that aren't necessarily on the internal team. So there's more of this overall collaboration internally, externally, and even within the agency world. I think that has definitely taken huge steps in the right direction to deliver better work faster and without sacrificing quality.
I always thought, like, one of the things that I liked least when I had to work with agencies is if I was trying to say, why am I paying X number of hours for like this person if I didn't like their work, right? I think more of the project based, or your ability to, if I don't like this copywriter, we can move to another copywriter. Like, it gives you a lot more flexibility without that person like being on your rostered team, which then it's more of a, I don't want to say HR, but it's probably more of, we'll provide them feedback. We'll give them this feedback versus like, hey, don't give me that copywriter again. Right. Didn't love their stuff. I think we could do better. It gives you more flexibility, I think, to choose who you want to work with.
I think that would keep you around as an agency partner longer and maintain some of these client relationships, because if someone asks you for a new creative team or a new copywriter or a new creative, and you're like, well, we don't really have anybody, you are stuck. That's when someone will go and seek out a new agency and you'll just be replaced. So I think in order to maintain your position with that organization and maintain a good partnership, you kind of have to be able to flex people in and out as things get stale to keep the employees engaged, but the client happy with fresh work. Because I think there were a lot of instances in the past where things just got stale because they were the same eyes doing the same thing time and time again. And who wouldn't fall into mediocrity? It's almost like you're working on autopilot.
One of the segments that we have is brands that we love. Do we have any agencies that we love that are getting the model right?
Absolutely. I can think of a few. The one that immediately came to mind was Bright Scout. And you and I have both worked with them, founded by Charles Hagas.
Love Charles.
He's an amazing guy. Hopefully we'll get the chance to have him on our podcast at some point. It would be amazing to have him as a guest. So Charles, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on soon. I think there were a few reasons why Bright Scout stood out to me. Their book of work was incredible across all avenues. I would say there wasn't something where I was just like, that's subpar. I questioned their abilities. Their book of work was fantastic. I think they were great in the onboarding process and offered that flexible model of you're not just stuck to these specific people. You will get people as the work comes in. So if you need someone to just do social posts that are static, we'll put a really good creative on it. They were very flexible with the ways that we wanted to work. They unlocked capabilities and expanded our capabilities beyond what we had internally. They were very responsive in terms of our feedback and learning the ways we wanted to work and trying to work asynchronously when we're in meetings all the time and only had meetings when we really needed to chat something through. They challenged our ideas and tried to think about how this would work towards the evolution of the brand, which I think is huge. And we were able to have really good conversations that challenged our thoughts and the brand and where it was going to go and helped us think bigger, both internally and externally. There were a lot of, I would say, really good wins and benefits of working with this type of agency. But I think working with Bright Scout specifically, I would say, they optimize the way that we use our resources, both internally and externally, by being able to put focus and specialized experts where we needed them the most. It allowed all of our resources to focus on work that ultimately drove impact. And then it enhanced our capabilities and allowed us to deliver more quickly without sacrificing quality of work, which ultimately allowed us to contribute more value and contribute more to the organization's overall business and goals, and really evolve the brand and push things forward. I would look at any opportunity to work with Bright Scout again. I think they're an amazing group of individuals to work with. Communication was great, and they really felt like an extension of the team versus someone you threw a brief at, they ran off, did their thing, and you came back and you had no idea what to expect. You were very integrated throughout every step of working with them, which I think helps you get to where you want to be a lot quicker.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that we talked about that I thought Bright Scout did really well is I remember getting on a call with them. I think there was one person in Florida, one person in Brazil, another person was somewhere else in the UK. They really harnessed the global network and global talent. I thought that was great. So it was one of those things where things were getting done, even if it wasn't on our time, it was getting done work after hours, work before hours. And they were constantly coming to us with, hey, we think we could make this more efficient. Hey, is this working? Hey, we'll share our tools with you. I agree. I'd say Bright Scout was one that came to mind when I thought about brands doing the new agency model.
To sum everything up, we love the new agency model and like where it's headed, moving from that fixed, more retainer-based model to more of a flexible and collaborative model. Internally and externally, we've seen a lot of benefits of that. Being able to tap into the remote environment and a global network of expertise is not only beneficial to agencies and internal agencies, but also to talent themselves with opportunity the way that you want to work. But it also allows you to hone your craft and focus your talents on projects that really demand your specific expertise rather than being a spread thin jack of all trades. And ultimately, the closer you are and the more integrated teams are together leads to kind of a more engaged workforce, more cohesive work, better output altogether. And I think having that core centralized person who's connecting all the dots or making sure that that's established and you're thinking through how that's being done, thinking through things end to end is really the key to success, regardless of what working model or agency model you decide to work within.
The only thing I would add is if you're listening to this and you're sitting there and you have an agency of record and you're wondering if this new agency model is for you, I think you should go out and just look at it. Talk to companies like the Bright Scouts of the world and see how you could potentially reshape your marketing department, reshape your stable of agencies to get more flex support as you need it, where you need it. No, I don't think you're ever too late to sort of revamp your agency model, your stable of agencies, and how you use them. I think things are moving fast. Like we talked with Sabrina DeVito about AI. Agencies are going to start using AI. So it's a perfect time to think about how you're using your agencies today. And is it the most effective and most efficient way?
I love that. Not being afraid to embrace change and say, hey, it's time to do something different and not default to the way that things have always been done. Even just to look into it can help make things more efficient, cost optimal and ultimately end up delivering better work and enhancing value. So I really love that point. If you have any questions, any thoughts, maybe you completely disagree with this and think agency of record is the way to go, we'd love to hear all of your thoughts. Visit marketingperspective.com, share all of your questions, topics, anything that's keeping you up at night and you want us to talk about. We're here for it, and we may not be able to solve all of your problems, but we will definitely have some opinions. Like and subscribe to Clickworthy Combos wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music. Share it with somebody that you know or that you don't know. And we will be back with another episode next week. Later.
Wow, wow.